Nicholas. Nicholas is full of fruity passion to create ways for people to spark the deeper magical wisdom within their hearts. While life coaching detransitioners and parents of gender-confused individuals, he also co-created a children's book series, You Can't Steal My Smile, with his friend Kim O, a relational soul coach to empower children to root in their inner resilience. Witness his liberal journey to self-love and remembering his soul by soaking in the graphic novel Trans to Detrans, a social solution. It's totally possible to heal gender dysphoria and other mental illness. Welcome.
Thank you, Laura. So I want detransitioners to be like a beacon of hope, of truth and honesty. Because sharing our stories is not always easy. It's not beautiful. It's not pretty. It's pretty dark. It's a lot of disassociation, chopping off your body parts, taking a medication that necessarily isn't meant to heal you. It actually has an opposite effect. But I want to be here to not necessarily focus on all the darkness. It's more about we are a possibility. That we are the possibility to move beyond the pain, because pain limits us. When we realize that we are beyond the pain, that's when healing can happen. I've experienced extensive childhood trauma living in Japan. I was born in California, but from a young age, my parents wanted me to experience life living in Japan with my extended family. I went to the same grade school that my mom went to, starting not freshman year, first grade. And through that experience, created a lot of belief systems. Kids immediately saw, there's something up with this boy. It's a little bit different. It's fruity, it's flamboyant, it's quiet, very much stereotypical of what a feminine gay boy is. So they immediately found me as a target. It was easy. I was quiet, still am, delicate and soft. And so these attributes were a way for boys and girls to attack me. And so they made me feel wrong. And these feelings started to develop into belief systems. Because when you have traumatic experiences, it creates a disassociation from your mind and your body. And so having the feelings of shame, anger, sadness attached with a belief from an experience, like bullying, can then create a belief within me that said, I'm not lovable. There's something wrong with me. I'm not worthy of love. And we all experience this to a level. So we can all sort of empathize and realize we're human, we have all these experiences. But from a young age, I didn't know how to cope, understand, and process all these emotions. So what happened was these belief systems became my identity. And letting those belief systems lead my life. So from first grade until sixth grade, it was like daily bullying. All the boys would come after me and just say and ask me awful things, and I took that on and believed it. And so years and years and years went by without a belief system, those belief systems being disrupted. So, and as puberty started around like 12, 13, which is around sixth grade or so, like hormones within my body were like so bursting to the surface, and I'm finding myself attracted to these boys, the boys in my class. It's like, okay, I like these boys, they're cute, I wish they would like me. But at the same time, I don't feel lovable, I don't feel worthy of love. So, part of my story is understanding internalized homophobia and digesting that and learning to love that. Because no one in my community, no one in my family was showing me how to love myself, how to show up in moments of sadness and fear. Because even when my parents would ask, what are you feeling, what are you thinking? I would shut down and not share. And this happened from such a young age. I would burst with emotions and they would not handle that well. My parents did not know how to handle me because I was just a difficult kid. And so trust was not established from a young age. So my relationship with my parents was really awful and destructive and unhealthy from such a young age. So imagine having all these emotions, being bullied, but not having an outlet to share with anybody. So where does it go? Just stays inside and feeds onto the belief system that there's something wrong with me. So around age 13, my family and I moved back to the States. We find a house in Chicago, and I start to go into 7th grade and then move into 8th grade, but that's when gender ideology started to trickle in. I would go on YouTube because a friend would be like, so there's this thing called BuzzFeed. They got cool stuff. And by being shared these videos, the algorithm will be like, oh, okay, this person likes gay stuff. Okay, this person likes, I don't know, gender stuff. Okay, let's keep feeding him more of this information. And that started to create a fixation, hyperfixation on this false identity because it was an outlet to reason, oh, there is something wrong with me. I am a different gender. I am not gay. I don't want to be gay because being gay, one, in my culture is unacceptable. I grew up being told that being gay is wrong. You know, all this homophobic experiences I had as a kid was confirmed as wrong. So I was like, okay, these videos are telling me I have a different solution. I have a way to escape being gay. And so this was the introduction into erasing the gay away. How convenient that I could be a different gender and not necessarily have to accept the fact that, you know, I like boys and that's okay, or I like men and that's okay. And so around high school, we were given an iPod, no supervision, and I could go on the iPod and just watch YouTube videos all day long and not have anybody tell me, stop, get off of that, don't watch that. And so my parents didn't know what was going on. My parents had no idea I was watching gender videos. And they would start noticing, like, what's going on with Nicholas? Like, he's painting his nails, he's dressing a little bit differently. And so they would ask, and it would immediately turn into like a explosive fight. Like, I remember throwing textbooks at my parents because I was so angry. And my dad would be like, oh, he has gender issues. And that would really freak me out because I thought there was something wrong with me and he was making me wrong. And it would be like this whole big thing. And so you can imagine my relationship with my parents, horrible. My mental health is horrible. And my outlet is all about gender, my outlet that I receive information. And so as time goes by, around like junior year and senior year, that's when I start to watch like surgery videos of trans-identified men. And they're like chopping up their faces, you know, getting breast augmentation and other surgeries that want to affirm their gender. And so that to me is glorifying me into and drawing me into this idea that, oh my God, I have the ability to just transform my body so that I can be loved by a man. Because that's all I wanted. All I ever wanted was to be loved for being me and accepted. But in order to do that, I have to go through so many different obstacles. And the wound was willing to do that. The belief system that there was something wrong with me was willing to do that. And so around age 18, once I turned 18, I went on to Planned Parenthood, scheduled an appointment for their gender clinic there, and within 2 visits, I was given hormone replacement therapy. I didn't have any necessarily, well, I met with a therapist once. They were like, so what's going on? I was telling them, I'm feeling suicidal, I have dysphoria, I need help, please help me. And so they were like, yeah, there's you should go on hormone medication. So I was just giving the pills like candy. It was really easy. And so I started taking the medication. It was really good. It felt really good because the first time I took it, it felt like such a euphoric high. I felt crazy because I was like, this feels so good. This is what joy feels like. I haven't felt this in so long. Because at the time I was constantly riddled in my mind. In my mind, I was constantly thinking about suicide, thinking about depression, thinking about how disgusting my body parts are, and how much I wanted to cut off and honestly put in. Like I just really want to chop up my body so I could be whole and lovable. And so all these dark thoughts sort of lifted as I started to take the medication. It sort of alleviated those painful thoughts and emotions because I thought this was heading in the right direction. But I thought maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel, which there is, but I was heading in the wrong tunnel. And so as time went on and I started to change my name legally, and then go to school in Milwaukee, which was an art school called Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, I fit in because most of the kids were non-binary or trans. So I was like, oh, this is weird. I'm fitting in for the first time. Everybody is a different gender. Okay. And even with the endocrinologist that I met in Milwaukee, he just didn't need any sort of permission or any sort of like medical diagnosis from a therapist or anything like that to tell me that, or to sort of meet with him. He was like, oh, you've gone to Planned Parenthood? Okay, cool. Let's start helping you with rebalancing your hormones so that you can be like the ideal biological woman. And so he was helping me, level out my hormones. He would periodically ask, like, are you meeting with a therapist? But it wasn't a requirement. He just asked, and I would mainly tell him no. And that was that. There was no mental health services that were guided and pushed because I think that's what I super needed. To say that someone wants to go from one sex to the opposite, which is impossible, that's an extreme thought. It's not normal, it's unhealthy. And to entertain that was such a disservice to my body and my mental health. And I don't think the doctors necessarily know that to the degree of, I don't think that they necessarily know that they're harming people. And if I could speak to that doctor today, I would just tell them the honest truth. You've harmed me. I forgive you, but like what you're doing to people is actually not healthy. You're trying to kill the body. You're trying to disintegrate and abuse and harm the biological human body that was given to us so freely by our mothers and the earth and God. And that's so unloving and unnatural to chop off our body parts and take in hormones that actually reject and suppress our natural endocrine system. The body's freaking out. The body's like, what are you doing to me? I know what I'm doing. I know how to heal. I know how to create new cells. I know how to breathe. So why are you doing this? So it's a rejection of the self mentally, but also physically, which is it's such a devolution of humanity. And this is just a symbolic representation of it. And so this experience of medical transition, thank God I did not do any surgeries to myself, but the medical transition of taking hormone replacement therapy lasted for 3 years. And during these 3 years, it just intensified the mental illness that I was experiencing. Sure, it alleviated some of it because the facial hair disappeared. My body feminized a little bit, yet I still had more depression. I had this intense chest pain that felt like my heart was being squeezed every single day because that was my heart telling me, you're not living your truth. You're not living aligned to your divine blueprint that you were here to accomplish. You're going against yourself. You're not expressing yourself. And I was also experiencing tremendous social anxiety. It was hard for me to even go outside because I felt like I couldn't pass. I didn't look woman enough. I wasn't lovable. And so these thoughts and emotions that I thought would be alleviated because I believe the trans influencers saying, you're gonna feel better, you're gonna be more aligned, you're gonna be more authentic. Was actually, I bought into the lie. It was such an absolute lie. And so I realized this isn't working. Let's try a different route. So I picked up this book called, I don't remember right now, but it's about transforming the subconscious mind. And I started to realize, well, your belief systems and your emotions combined create your state of being. So if you're telling yourself I'm not lovable, and you're also feeling shame and sadness alongside those thoughts and beliefs, well, that becomes your identity. That becomes who you believe you are. And so I realized, okay, how does this apply to transition? Like, how did I create this trans identity? What are the thoughts and beliefs that are fueling this identity, right? And so the more I self-reflected, the more I started to understand where this was coming from. There was this one day I was sitting outside on the grass with my at my parents' house, and I asked myself, what's been suppressed that needs to be expressed? What needs to be expressed? And then immediately, like feelings of sadness, shame started to arise. And I started writing all the reasons that I thought were, they are gender dysphoric experiences of, hating my voice, hating my body hair, and all the reasons and experiences from childhood that were associated to those feelings and thoughts arose. And I started to see the truth for the first time. I started to see, oh my God, I am experiencing gender dysphoria, but it's because of an experience. It's because of these thoughts and feelings. I realized I am not those thoughts, feelings, or experiences. I'm the one observing it. And I don't have to necessarily be attached to those experiences. I don't have to be that pain. And the more I untangled that and realized this isn't for me, this is going against my body, I started to feel sadness and compassion for my body and realized what I'm doing is so harmful. And then on, I continued to self-reflect and ask myself, who am I biologically? Like, who am I biologically? And I realized I'm a man. I'm just a really feminine man. I have a male body. It's so beautiful and lovable. I love my body. It's created in such a beautiful, awesome way that I've neglected it and not been seeing that because I thought I was not lovable. So that unfolded the detransition process. I grabbed the pills and just threw them in the trash. It's like, no more. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this to my body. I'm not going to harm my body no longer. I'm not going to harm my mind. I'm not going to choose those thoughts and feelings that say that there's something wrong with me because it's just a lie. And the more I did that, and the more I just trusted that I'm being guided by love, that I'm choosing to love myself for the first time in my life, that took me down the pathway of really learning really learning the mindset of resilience. Because I was not given this as a kid. I was not given that feelings are fast, they don't last. I was given the fact that I'm not my emotions, thoughts, or feelings. And through uncovering and realizing that, I then created a graphic novel and really wrote out my story and created so much art because this topic is so dark and it deserves so much light. And so through my creativity, because that is my creative expression to draw and paint, I created a graphic novel, also a children's book series to teach inner resilience to kids, because kids deserve to realize that, I'm not my thoughts and emotions. I am beyond that. I am resilient. And to teach kids that from a young age will set them up so much better in life than how I lived my life for the last 24 years. And so kids deserve love. Kids deserve to realize that they are awesome, they are powerful, that they are born in the right body, that they are born to do great things. They're not born to chop off their bodies. They're not born to harm themselves. They're born to spread more love and cheerful and joy to the world. That's what I have.
Thank you, Nicholas. That was very powerful. We're going to have questions at the very end of that. Very powerful. We appreciate you sharing that story. I think it probably moved everybody in the audience. Next up, we have Laura Becker. Laura is a detransitioner and author of the upcoming book, Surviving the Trans Myth, a Detransitioner's Memoir. Laura identified as a transgender from 16 to 22, took testosterone and had her breasts removed with no deeper psychological evaluation. She detransitioned at 22 after realizing her gender issues came from her childhood trauma and now advocates against gender affirmation. Focusing on treating the root causes of mental health issues, Laura offers consultation to parents of gender-confused kids and peer coaching to other detransitioners. Laura?
Hi, everybody. So we've already heard some amazing stories like Autumn's and Nick's. And my story has a lot of similarities because at the core, as you could imagine, is someone who doesn't feel that their body is okay. They don't feel that they are lovable as they are. They feel that there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed. They don't know what it is, and then they're presented with a solution. So my story is a cautionary tale. My story is what happens when the community does not protect its youth. It happens to the most vulnerable. It happens to kids that do not have proper parental support, do not have proper peer support, psychological support. And it happens to kids that turn to all the systems imaginable for support, and all they find is affirmation of their self-hatred, of the gender affirmation model, that they should disassociate from their bodies, that there is something wrong with them. And then once they have harmed themselves, once they're medically mutilated, once they're suicidal and even more traumatized, they're just left with nothing, even less than they had before. And so my story is a cautionary tale, but it is also one of resilience. And I'm very grateful for all of you for listening. So I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, born and raised. And I was raised in a very standard Midwestern Catholic family. I spent my time in the Wauwatosa Public School District. And as with the other panelists, I felt that there was something off about me. I struggled to connect with peers, with girls my age, but also with boys. I was more comfortable by myself or with animals. I didn't really understand what this kind of social game was that everyone else seemed to understand. And I felt a deep sense of loneliness. And I realized that this loneliness came from not being seen by other people like me. I was quirky, I was a tomboy, I was more comfortable playing by myself, drawing, writing stories, making up games in my imagination, and I kind of lived in my own fantasy world because I wasn't connecting with other people my age. And I started going through puberty at a young age, around 9 years old, and I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, meaning that I had higher testosterone levels. This caused severe emotional dysregulation, and at the same time, I started to finally feel all of the pain that I'd gone through as a child, always being picked last for teams and partnerships when I'm supposed to pair up and work together, picked last for sports teams, always feeling left out, always feeling alienated. And at 11 years old, I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. I was diagnosed as being autistic, and that became an identity of shame because at the same time, in my home, I was faced with even further alienation. My father was a rageful man. He was selfish, and he took out his stress on the people closest to him. And so while I was ostracized and bullied at school, I was bullied even further at home. My father would scream at me. He would verbally abuse me. He would call me worthless. He would say that I was pathetic and disgusting, ugly, unwanted. He wished that I was never born. He said that I was trash, that I was an animal. He would call me it. He would dehumanize me. And I would try to fight back. I would try to use my countercultural, rebellious spirit to fight for myself and fight for what I thought was the truth. But he would always defeat me. He would always make me cry. And while I was crying, he would laugh in my face. He would laugh at me and laugh at my pain. And I learned at around the age of 11 that God doesn't want me to be loved. Because why would I be alive just to suffer like this? I didn't understand why I was being hurt by someone that said that he cared about me, and why I was being left alone to deal with everything. And so at that young age, I truly believed that I was worthless. And my parents, they trusted what the doctors told them. My mom saw that I was having problems emotionally and socially. She got me the autism diagnosis. When that didn't help anything, they started putting me on medications. I was on dozens of different antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, birth control, and sleeping pills. Nothing was helping. And my mom, in her internal conflict of what was happening with her husband abusing her daughter, she wanted to believe in the medical system. She wanted to believe that there was just some kind of chemical imbalance, that there was something internally wrong with my brain, that it was me that was the problem. She would say, well, you're very difficult to deal with, and you encourage the abuse because you try to fight back. And as a kid, all I felt was, well, even my own mom doesn't really understand me. I don't feel loved. I don't have anybody in my life. And so I started off in this medical pathway, internalizing that medicalizing my body was the only way to treat what was wrong with me, and that I was just fundamentally born wrong, and that I would probably never be happy because since I started puberty, there was nothing but depression, and I had no friends. I became suicidal around the age of 14, daily fantasizing about suicide. I started cutting myself. I started abusing alcohol, weed, pills, anything. I was overeating. I was sleeping. Literally anything that I could do to numb the pain, to escape it, to try to survive. All the while continuously being abused and then being gaslit about what was going on. My father would say, "You're imagining things. You're making that up. I never said that. I never did that. You're just ungrateful. And it's your problem." But at the same time, he would then come around and try to win me back over in his guilt and shame. He would come to me and say, "What can I do to improve our relationship? What can I do to, encourage you to not be depressed? I don't understand." And I would say, "I need you to help me. I need you to stop abusing me. I need you to stop treating me badly. And then he would kind of feel guilty, and he would shrug, and he would walk away, and he would deny it and suppress it. And so in my house, I learned I'm the problem. No matter what I do, when I seek help, I'm not going to get it. And those closest to me are just denying everything. As a child, that's all I knew. That was my reality. That I was a worthless piece of shit, that I needed to be alone, otherwise I'd hurt, and that I needed drugs to cure what was wrong with me. Because I was so socially isolated, I did what all kids do, which is to go on the internet. I was trying to find community, and I found it. On Tumblr, I found a different collection of other quirky girls who liked classic rock and comedy and who were creative and who made memes and songs. And I felt for the first time that I really had friends. And then on Tumblr, I found political indoctrination. And as someone with a very intellectual mind, I find it fascinating. The feminism, the Black Lives Matter, the gay rights, and then the trans rights. And I just accepted it as normal because I was told that all of these other movements were good and progressive and revolutionary. And so, of course, I thought that the gender ideology was groundbreaking. I wanted to be a revolutionary. I was filled with anger. I was filled with pain. I was a teenager, and I would have been filled with angst and pain anyway, but I was especially filled with angst and pain. And I was writing plenty of depressing poetry. And unfortunately, it didn't stop with the depressing poetry, because I found that on Tumblr, all these different identities existed. You could just pick whatever label most suited you. All these different gender identities to describe yourself and express yourself. I had started to cope with my social anxiety by self-medicating with weed. I was smoking weed daily, which finally allowed me to feel expressive and creative instead of just hiding in my shell. But while I was going through this transformative period, I was open to anything because I had no parental supervision. I had no parental guidance. I was left alone in my parents' basement to do drugs, to go on Craigslist and try to find men to hook up with, because I was desperate for male love and attention. And I didn't understand what was wrong with me. I just knew there was something because I was told it over and over and over. And so when I learned about transgender identity, I thought, this is it. This describes my soul, my body, my mind. This makes everything make sense. This is all because my brain and body are wrong. There's something wrong with me. I was born wrong. And so maybe I am non-binary. Maybe I'm queer. Maybe I'm something, anything besides being a girl, being a female. Because it's never gotten me anywhere in life to be a female. My body has endured all of this pain, and there's nothing to me but pain. And so I was confused because I was dressing in boys' clothes. I was dressing as a tomboy. I wanted to only present masculinely and had nothing to do with feminine expression. And yet I was very deeply attracted to men. And I was even more confused. Okay, so I'm not a lesbian, but there's no way I can be a straight girl. There's no way I can be a normal straight woman. That only left one option, being a gay man. Because of my disassociation, because of living in my fantasy worlds, I was able to have magical thinking and imagine myself as this other person, this avatar of this fictional fantasy identity of self that would be lovable, that would have only charisma, that would make everyone laugh, that would move people with my poetry and would be cared for and important and valuable and seen. And I thought, well, if I'm queer and if I'm have the spirit and the energy of a gay man, maybe that means that I am a trans man. Obviously, this doesn't make any sense saying it now.
No.
But that is what a teenage brain goes to when the drugs aren't working, the pills aren't working, there's no one there to help. I went to my school's GSA club in high school, Wauwatosa East High School. And they validated the gender ideology. They showed me the genderbread person, where there's the spectrums from masculine to feminine, and what do you feel in your heart versus what do you feel in your brain, and what does your body say? And because I hated my body and I hated my heart that was so broken, the only thing I had left was my spirit, my soul. I wanted to have my soul be expressed, and I felt like my body was preventing it from being loved and appreciated. And so at 15, I came out as non-binary. I came out as genderqueer. And I was wrestling with being trans because ultimately I knew the truth that my body was female. I was confronted with it every day of how ugly it was, and I hated my breasts. They were too saggy. I was trying to wear men's shirts. It wasn't flat enough. I hated anything to do with my curves. I felt extremely vulnerable because I had no sense of self-worth. So how could I possibly own any sort of feminine power or sexuality? I was watching porn. I started watching very violent porn to try and cope with the abuse that I was experiencing while having an emerging sexuality and romance. And in high school, I ended up being used by several men who were confused about their sexualities. They were gay, but I was identifying as a gay man. We were all pretending that we were somehow not our sexes. And I ended up falling in love with 3 different gay guys in high school subsequently. It didn't go well. 3 unrequited loves, but not just unrequited loves, which are agonizing in themselves, but unrequited loves where each one meant that it is my body's fault that this person doesn't love me. If I was only a real man, this person would love me. And that happened over and over and over again. And my parents did not offer support. My mom was disassociating because of the family situation. I had 2 younger siblings that were also struggling deeply. My father was not mature enough to handle anything. And I went to the school, they affirmed me. They said, yes, you're valid as a trans person, you're valid as a queer person. And so by the time I turned 18, I was extremely suicidal. I had been inpatient, I had been outpatient on so many medications, nothing was working, everything was getting worse. And then I went to college. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just struggling to get through each day. I was eating, I was obese. I was just trying not to kill myself. And that's when I came out as transgender, because I felt like, well, at this point, I'm already so messed up that what do I really have to lose? The ideology says that if you have these feelings of self-hate and this identity with your spirit, that the only cure for that is to be trans, is to transition. I didn't want to be trans. I thought that seems miserable. That seems like maybe I'll be even more unlovable because I'll be in this in-between space between male and female. But in my mind, that was the only way out, because I felt like this creature that I was, that my father had called it and sewer creature and dehumanized, that I could never be loved as this person. So I felt like I must transform. That's when I went to my college professor. I went to my transgender professor who was teaching the sociology of sexuality and queer postmodern class that I thought was ingenious at the time when I was 18. And she told me, this was a female identifying as a man, she told me, you know, if you're serious about transition, you can get testosterone for free at this clinic in Chicago. So I drove to the Howard Brown Clinic of Chicago, and I got a free prescription for testosterone. I told them, yes, I'm autistic, I have PCOS, I'm suicidal, I use drugs, I'm on all these medications, I have this history of suicidality. And they said, wow, you must really need these hormones.
Oh,
And I was like, well, thank you so much. And I left that day with a prescription for a very high dose of testosterone that I was to inject into my thigh every week. So at 19, when I was suicidal, I then started injecting a heavy dose of a steroid. That steroid intensified every single traumatic feeling that I had. I was reckless, I was angry, I was impulsive, I was sexually violent, I was lashing out, I started to steal from stores, I was driving drunk all the time. I didn't care because I was so nihilistic and depressed and wanting to die that it didn't matter what I did. Now I had the energy pumping through my veins to do something. I started acting out, I pushed away the couple friends that I had, I was abusive towards people. Eventually, I lost everybody in my life because I wasn't stable. I was abusing people. But most of all, I was abusing myself because that is all that I knew. And no one was stepping in to help me. And so I turned to my psychiatrist and I said, the pills, really aren't helping. She's always saying, well, do you want to try another one? Do you want to up this dose? Do you want to lower that dose? There was never any examination of this thing called trauma. There was no examination of the deeper core wounds that I'd experienced. It was all about treating the symptoms and never the actual cause of the illness. And so I went to her and I said, I'm transgender. I now have these hormones. I think that I have gender dysphoria and I think that I would like to have surgery. And she said, well, I've heard of transgender before, but let me look into it more. The next appointment, she said, I think that you do meet the qualifications for gender dysphoria, and I would be happy to write you a surgical letter. There was no further evaluation. There was no further discussion. I didn't have a regular therapist at the time. This psychiatrist was a woman that I saw a couple times a year to talk about medication. She didn't have a right to give me this diagnosis and to prescribe me this letter, but she did because she had read history books about the gay rights movement and the Stonewall riots. And she thought, well, trans is just like being gay. And Laura is very well spoken, and Laura seems very self-aware. And I remember one of my unrequited loves, he told me, Laura, you're the most rational person I've ever met at being irrational. Because I was so articulate about my delusions. And I really was. But in this case, because I came across as knowing myself, the psychiatrist didn't do her job to protect me from the medical system. And so she wrote me the letter, and I went to a clinic in Madison, Wisconsin, where I met a plastic surgeon who had his entire operation dedicated to performing gender-affirming double mastectomies. He was practicing on girls as young as 16. And when I was 20 years old, I went into his office, suicidal, deranged, couldn't even shower or brush my teeth on a regular basis. But the letter said, Laura's stable and can consent to the surgery. She's of sound mind and she's not suicidal. So I went in a 15-minute appointment. This is in my surgical records. In the surgical records, the surgeon says, Laura Becker is a very pleasant 20-year-old female, and I've approved her for surgery. He knew I was a woman. He knew that I was mentally ill. It didn't matter to him because another doctor had signed off on the paperwork and he was going to get his paycheck. Again, no one protected me. There was no safeguards. There was nothing. And so I conveyor belted myself along, and only being on testosterone for 7 months, I was then given surgery to remove my breasts. My breasts were cut off. They were thrown in the trash. My nipples were carved up and reshaped into masculine presenting nipples with no nerve function, no form, and they were grafted back onto my scarred chest. And I thought, well, I hope this helps, but I don't know if it will. And I wrote in my diary a week before the surgery, life has been so miserable for so long. I wish that when I go under in the anesthesia that I'll never wake up. And I did wake up, and my breasts were gone, and I didn't feel any better, but I wanted to, because all I ever wanted was to feel better and not hate myself. And the next 2 years, I identified as transgender. I was hooking up with men. I was doing hard drugs, including crack and meth. I had nothing to live for. And I realized my life was really going nowhere. And after I was discarded by the 47-year-old crack addict that I was hooking up with at the age of 21, I debated if I should kill myself or not, as I was every day. But I really laid there in my bed. I took a semester off of college, and I laid there and I thought to myself, do I really have nothing to live for? Do I really have anything to live for? Is there anything good about me? Is there anything that truly means I deserve to die? And I made a pros and cons list and went over for months the debate about if my life was salvageable in any way. And I decided that because I hadn't killed myself at that point, that I probably was never going to. I'd probably never have the guts to do it. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to live, then I need to change something. So I went in and I had a psychological evaluation done because I didn't know what was wrong with me at that point. It seemed like there was things even beyond the diagnoses I had that were wrong with me. I went in and I was shocked that the clinic diagnosed me with something I never considered: PTSD, trauma from my dad's abuse, trauma from the interpersonal relationships, and trauma from the transition itself. The practitioner wrote in, Laura had her breasts removed on a whim. And I read that and I thought, on a whim? I was articulating this and ruminating on this for years. And then it dawned on me how insane it was that I was just this wreck of a person having my breasts cut off. And I didn't really feel any different. I was the same person before, during, and after the entire transition. The same personality, the same fashion, the same problems. It hadn't changed anything. And when I learned that there was something called trauma is a wound. Trauma and abuse are inflicted by the environment or by a circumstance. It's not something you're born with. I wasn't born traumatized. I wasn't born abused. I became that way because of other people in my life who did not protect me and who hurt me. And I finally was able to separate myself a little bit from the pain and realize that I was never meant to be a trans man. I was just an abused girl. And no one wants to be an abused girl. And so I began the process of detransitioning. I didn't have even language for what that was. I started posting on Tumblr about how I had trauma and had PTSD and how they said I had it from the transition. And the algorithm started recommending me other posts from women that were saying similar things. And a feminist woman messaged me and asked me if I'd like to join a Facebook group for women that had transitioned and were questioning it. I joined this group of about 22 women. This was in 2019. I was 22. And I realized all of these women had the same exact problems as me. We looked the same. We had hairy legs. We all had our breasts removed. We were autistic. We all seemed to have similar problems. And I realized there are other women like me. I'm not the only one. And that's when I finally realized that I could just be a female. I realized that my body had always been female. And not only had it experienced pain, but it had experienced every moment of joy, laughter, creativity, love, sexuality, pleasure, meaning that I'd ever had. And I realized that this isn't about this identity. This is just about biological reality. And that I had internalized misogyny, internalized self-hatred for being female, because that is the only way that I grew up. That's my entire puberty was just hate, self-hate. And I detransitioned. And for the last 6 years now, I just turned 28. For the last 6 years, I've been through hell, but they say that the hell of healing is better than the hell of trauma. And it really is. Because for the last 6 years, I've been finding other people like me, like Nicholas, other artsy, quirky misfits that are expressive and sensitive and loving and smart. And I've been seeing that it's not just me. It's not just 22 women in a Facebook group. This is thousands of girls, thousands of boys that are being manipulated into thinking that their bodies are the problem, whether they come from an abuse history online, in person, whether they come from internalized homophobia, internalized misogyny, whether they're just groomed in the school system like Autumn was, just for going through puberty and normal pains of adolescence. This is happening all over the world. And I know this because I've spent the last 3 years traveling the world, speaking at events like this, sharing my story, and speaking to thousands of parents who come to me and say, Laura, my kid is just like you. She's quirky, she's artsy, she's weird, and she's sensitive, and she is very romantic, but she doesn't understand that she's a girl. And they tell me, Laura, I wish my daughter could grow up to be like you someday. And I think that I can't believe that I've survived all of this to the point where people care about me. People actually love me. I never thought that that would ever happen. And the reason that it happened is because I started speaking the truth. I started speaking the truth about the abuse. It wasn't silenced anymore. I started speaking the truth about the gender mutilation industry. I started speaking the truth about the parents that are being harmed, the women and men that are being harmed, the children, the lies that are spread in the media. I started expressing and articulating everything through truth and loving the truth and realizing that truth is a virtue, that God loves the truth, that all that matters is truth and love. And nothing that I've done has been achieved without truth. There is no healing without truth. There is no healing without acceptance of reality. And trans ideology and everything that goes with it is a lie. It's an illusion. That's why I have my memoir coming out later this year, Surviving the Trans Myth, because it's a mythos. And unfortunately, there are people like me who will never have normal bodies again, who will never have intact, beautiful adult bodies because they were in pain when they were kids. They were in pain and they were confused and no one was there to protect them. And the institutions and the people that claim to be for truth and justice and health and mental health and healing are actually the ones that cause the damage. And so my message to you guys is you must love the truth. You must speak the truth and express it as articulately as you can, not just on this issue, but in everything, in your marriage, in your relationship to your child, in your relationship to yourself. And when you speak to anyone else, to be earnest, to be open about your experiences. I haven't gotten anywhere in life without being vulnerable. And that's why I'm trauma dumping 24/7 now. And I love it because it finally allows me to be clear about what is good, what really love is. And so I implore you to speak the truth at every instance that you can when you go to these school boards, when you're online, when you're with your extended family, when you're with people that have political differences, when you're at the grocery store, when you're lying in bed thinking about whatever, fears and angst that you have. Think, okay, What is real? What is love? What would God intend? What is the highest version of truth and goodness that you can imagine? And to take steps towards that. And truth telling is the very first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Another very powerful message. One thing I wanted to just add to their stories is, when you sign up and start to think about being in the transgender community, they shower you with a lot of love. But the moment you start to question it, even just say out loud, I'm not sure this is right for me, that trans community starts being negative and they cut you off. So when all these people have transitioned, they have done it by themselves or found other detransitioners to help them. The medical community is not there. Most of them go cold turkey off their meds. There's no help. So it really has been a journey. The other thing I just want to note is if you talk about the detransitioners, people out there will make it sound like there's only a few. There really aren't that many. And one of the detransitioners I have come in contact and talked with, she's on a page where there's 55,000 detransitioners. So this is not a small little group of people. It's big. So you don't hear from a lot of them because there's so much hate. It's very, very difficult for people to stand up and share their stories because they get a lot of hate wherever they are. But we also know that when you get that kind of hate, you're telling the truth and you're over the target. We have one last speaker and then we're going to open it up for questions. So Arya with Gays Against Groomers wants to come up and share some information.
Hi everyone, this is the last story. I wanted to focus specifically on the spiritual side of all of this. I feel like it's something that's not really talked about. It says in Peter, book 1, chapter 5, verse 8, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion for someone to devour. And if we listen to all of these stories, we see all these like common denominators. They were people that were rejected, people that felt unloved, that were isolated, that had nobody really, that did not even feel safe with their own family. So we see these common themes. And it's just beautiful that they're sharing these stories because I relate to that so much myself. As a child, I was also an oddball. I loved boy toys, so I just was never really into dolls. I just always liked my trucks and animal toys, and the dolls just kind of give me the ick. I remember that. And my mom would always try to get dolls for me, but I would always reject it, and I instead wanted my animal and my trucks. And she would try to convince me, but I didn't want that, and she would go and get me the toys that I wanted. But in that process, it put a little seed in my mind that there was something odd about me because I would always see other little girls with dolls. And my mom never made me feel weird about it, but it did plant that first seed that there was something possibly odd about me. But I was also too young to really think that hard about it. I was just happy that I got my trucks and my animal toys. And I also I remember as early as I could remember, I started crushing on girls. And I started freaking out because the world that I grew up in was girls should only crush on boys and boys should only crush on girls. And I was really confused. And again, it fed that seed that there was something wrong with me. And I didn't feel safe enough to talk about these questions with my parents, so I kept it all inside. And through Nicholas, we learned that whatever we keep inside, it just starts manifesting and growing bigger into our bodies. And it starts giving us falsehoods about ourselves. And, as I got a little bit older, started growing hair in my body, I, again, didn't understand that. So it's funny because I was never exposed to trans ideology as a child, but I started believing that I was a boy stuck in a girl's body. And again, I was so scared to tell anyone. It became like my big secret as a child because I thought, oh my gosh, like I like girls, I like boy toys, I'm more of a tomboy, I'm this. So it makes sense that I'm actually a boy. And it built in so much shame and guilt in my childhood because I had no one to talk to about it. So I was just like dying in my own mind, as a child. And I remember also just being very competitive with the boys around me. I wanted to be the fastest runner, the smartest. I was very competitive. But boys were often faster at running and things like that. And it made me feel inadequate again because I had this belief that I was a boy. And it also made me have this kind of resentment towards these boys. And of course, I also experienced a lot of bullying because, again, I was that odd kid. I liked rock music. I was the artist, the writer. So I was considered odd for that, which sounds silly now because why do we treat our artists in our generations in this way? Why do we push them outside? And then aside from that, I had this message that I was just unlovable and constantly rejected everywhere I went. Like in my family, everyone thought I was weird. Why can't you be normal? School, it's like, you're weird, you should kill yourself. So it's like all around, something's wrong with me. And I was also exposed to pornography at an early age. And this is how I cultivated more of like my lesbian fantasies. But it also cultivated more of a stronger hate towards myself because it led me to fantasize about me being a man and doing these things to these women. So I began to hate myself more because I couldn't actually do that. So it manifested into this desire of wanting to be a man. And again, I had never heard of trans ideology at this point, but I had cut my hair, dressed in boy clothes. I had changed my name to a boy name. At around 14, I was experimenting with several drugs, including hallucinogens. And I felt like I only liked myself when I was under the influence of something. And with acid in particular, I was able to like make my voice go deeper. And so I would always be tripping on this drug because I loved how like deep my voice would get. And I ended up doing like a lot of damage to my voice because I used to be like a decent singer, but like me being under the influence and like forcing myself to deepen it ended up causing damage. So I always felt like I was never good enough. I'm a very petite girl, so I'm not manly enough, and then I'm also not feminine enough. I don't fit in with the girls. All the girls are really into makeup, and X, Y, and Z, and the men are doing their own thing. I don't fit in. And a part of why I also gravitated towards presenting in a more masculine form was because it was a form of protection from other boys in my school. So it's odd to think now that I'm an adult that like 12-year-olds, 14-year-old boys are sexualizing their female peers or making comments about their bodies. And to me, dressing as a male protected me from other boys making comments the way that they would about my other female peers. So it became about protection as well. And I had this one encounter when I was on acid, and I was tripping really hard, and I was looking into the mirror, and I started seeing this demonic figure form there. It was my face, but it started configurating into very disturbing, very, very disturbing forms, and it started speaking to me, and it started telling me that, you're worthless, you're a piece of shit, you should die. It was just laughing at me. And it was shattering my spirit. I couldn't stop looking at it because it was so seductive and dark, and it just kept going and going and going. And then I see this bright light shining over me. And so I look up, and then I see what I believe to be God. It wasn't a face, it was just a bright light, but this bright light started speaking to me. And this bright light was speaking to me telepathically and told me that I was loved, that he loved me so much that everything that everyone else had said about me, that I was unlovable, that I was weird, that I wasn't good enough, that these were all lies. And he just loved every single part of me. Like, I had never felt a love like that. And I couldn't stop looking at it. It was so beautiful, and it was so merciful, so gracious. It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced. And then I realized, okay, I'm tripping really hard on drugs, and I left. And after I had sobered up, I kept thinking about that experience. But I didn't really understand what God was trying to tell me. And it's almost like I had chosen this demonic thing in the mirror, because this demonic figure was telling me all these lies. They were worthless. And God was telling me a truth about myself that I had never heard. But I couldn't believe it, so I kept living my life that best represented what this demonic influence wanted me to believe. So the years went by, again, just living a life of self-rejection, anger, depression, anxiety. And I was very fortunate where I was exposed to other conservative speakers by the time I was a senior. And it really helped explain why society was the way that it was. It talked so much about the impact of pornography culture. It hit on some gender ideology stuff too. This movement really spoke to me, and it began to really unpack a lot of things for me. And I just fell in love with it, and I just kept going on this rabbit hole, and it helped me just leave these things behind, and I became more feminine over time. And by the time I was in college, I remember being exposed to gender ideology for the first time. It was in a philosophy class. And by then, I was a different person. I was definitely much more conservative. And this professor of philosophy presented us as trans philosopher that talked about how misgendering someone is violence. And I remember being the only one pushing back at that. And my professor made me feel like I was crazy. I felt like everyone around me constantly made me feel like I was crazy for not going with the grain, basically, which is technically the theme of my entire life. I was always the odd one. By the time that I had graduated, I never really thought back on that, because I never thought that I would see what I was seeing now, that this ideology would expand like a wildfire, that it would not just be in a college setting, but that it would go into high school, that it would go to middle school, elementary school, and it just never crossed my mind. And I remember being in shock and just thinking oh my gosh, had this been around when I was in high school at my most vulnerable, I would have fallen for it. I mean, the drugs that I was doing to lower my voice, I can't imagine how seductive this ideology would have been. And so that's why it's so important to share these stories, because I think so many people are impacted by this ideology. And I would say about 3 years ago, I had another encounter with the Lord, because I was in an end child mutilation rally done by Matt Walsh in Tennessee. And I remember getting into a verbal fight with some of the radical trans activists, and I was really mad. I had so much hatred for them at that point because of the things that they were pushing. And then I remember I felt some kind of divine push, and something telling me they're sick, and you're only adding to their sickness. You're only adding fuel to the fire, and you shouldn't speak to them that way. I was immediately convicted. And I didn't understand, because that voice was not me. And I'm okay, that's weird. And I was an atheist, by the way. So I ignored it. I'm like, okay, whatever. Then on our way back from Tennessee to drive back to Chicago, I was just thinking about my life, just how everything was just rejection, isolation, depression, anger, rage. And all of these things have led to destructive choices over my life. And I just had this moment where I just completely broke down crying. And I felt this like divine spirit, that same energy that I had seen when I was 14 on drugs, just like completely cover me and tell me that I was loved. And it was like that same message that I had seen. And it just loved me so much. I felt so accepted. And that's when I had a realization like, God is real. And after that, my life really began to change. But I want to say that what was very impactful about this experience with God is that I kept having like revelation after revelation. And then I realized that by rejecting your body, putting yourself through puberty blockers, mutilating your body, all of these things is an act of rebellion against God because you're rejecting the masterpiece that He made you to be. And in a way, whether you're an atheist or religious or whatever, you are being compliant with demonic evil forces by doing this because you're making a bold statement that I reject what the Creator has made. And that's something that I want you all to know, like rejecting yourself, talking negatively about yourself, bringing yourself down, that is a lie from the enemy. And it's not the way that you see yourself in a negative light. It's not you in the image of God. He made you to be something better. He made you to spread light, to spread good. And I think for us to defeat this trans ideology, it's a multifaceted problem. It's not just about going to school. Sure, that's incredibly important and impactful. But I think we also have to tackle the porn industry. The porn industry is one of the greatest evils in this country that's just not really talked about. But porn is destroying the minds of our children, of adults. It's distorting our minds. Like for me, it made me want to be a man more because it was the way that I understood my bisexual experiences. Pornography corrupts the mind of our young men that then start sexualizing their other young female peers, and then their female peers don't feel safe and then want to dress like a male to protect themselves. So we need to protect our young women and then also our young men from the filth of the pornography industry. It's not a coincidence that gender ideology books are in conjunction with porn. I mean, how many times have we seen that? Like there's a connection there, there's a link there. So we know that a big part is targeting this porn industry. And I think a big part of it too is resorting to the light of God because that's the only way we're going to bring light. Where does light come? It comes from our Creator. We don't make it from ourselves. It's like we have to rely on the Lord to continue bringing these issues to light. And one thing I've learned too is even the most educated people people that you respect, can fall prey to this ideology. I've seen this over and over, and I think it's common for us to think that we're crazy. I know I felt crazy being the only one in college saying something. I'm like, is there something that like I don't know that everyone seems to know? So just remember, you're not crazy. This is a spiritual battle at the end of the day. And that is why God has brought so much light into all of you and the speakers that we had. If you notice, like their vibes are all light, and that's for a reason. And I really think God is using people, homosexuals, like Moms for Liberty. He's using so many people to bring light upon this satanic agenda. And I just want to finish off with Hebrews 13, verse 5. Jesus said, "I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you." Thank you.
But this time we will open it up for questions, so if you have a specific question, do you remember it?
No.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah, it was for Nicholas.
Okay.
How old were you when you were laying in the grass and you had that?
Oh, that was. No, 22. I was 22 years old. Yeah. At that point, I was watching detransitioner videos. I was introduced to detransitioners by Blair White, who's a trans-identified man, and he was just interviewing a lot of detransitioners. And I found this detransitioner named Shapeshifter, and he was talking about his story, and it mirrored my story perfectly. And I thought to myself, what? I might not be trans. And so that led me down this rabbit hole of watching more of his videos, and he felt like he killed a part of himself through medical transition. And I was like, okay, maybe I've done that too. And that maybe create that question, like, what's been suppressed that needs to be expressed? And it just all came out. It felt like finally the Pandora's box opened, all the darkness had to be unleashed.
Yes.
We got a question from the live viewers, and this one is for Laura. They want to know, do you still believe that there are genuine trans people out there?
Be honest.
Be honest.
Um,
We're all about transparency.
So I haven't, no, I don't. And the reason is because trans is an action that you take. It is a lifestyle choice that you make. It's a cosmetic surgery choice. And that's obviously a real experience that people do. But like usually when people ask that question, they're saying, is there some innate thing that makes that person need to have cosmetic surgery or to pretend to be the opposite sex in order to be happy? Really, do you think there's any medical or scientific basis for that? It's a spiritual belief that this person has something different about them and they choose to cope with it, much like someone uses drugs to cope or eats or is in a toxic relationship. There's no innateness that causes you to need to pretend to be the opposite sex.
All right. Their rebuttal was, so you don't believe in gender dysphoria, you're a conspiracy theorist.
So gender dysphoria is a vague term. Dysphoria means distress. Gender means, either could mean your body, your sex, or it can mean your social role in society, how you relate in your sex body with the world in a sociological sense. So in that sense, there's absolutely distress. I mean, life has distress in it. We exist in a body, it feels pain. There's definitely pain. I will never ever say that people don't feel pain around their sex, but there isn't some unique thing called gender dysphoria. There isn't some specialized thing that you can point out that's like, there's the gender dysphoria, it's underneath this fingernail, or, I know I'm meaning dismissive because I'm talking to a hater right now. That's why I'm sounding a little cheeky. But I will always validate the pain of people that have gone through this. It's excruciating to hate yourself or to feel like there's something wrong or missing, or to feel that you need to change something that is just naturally, created by God. So yeah, in that sense, pain is real, but if there's some innate special condition called gender dysphoria, no, that's again a spiritual belief.
All right, one last question is for the whole panel. Do you feel like social media caused this uptick in identifying as trans for these kids growing up from COVID up until 2024? What do you feel like was the biggest push for kids to start identifying as trans and go along with this? Whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
My honest opinion is that I do not think that it's just social media. It's very orchestrated. How are kids supposed to combat social media, the public education system, and any medical experts that they could go to for assistance when they start experiencing discomfort in their body, which is normal for, I'd say, 95% of adolescents going through puberty. I'm yet to meet a single adolescent that didn't at some point going through, we'll say 12 to 18 years old, didn't feel extremely uncomfortable at some point in their life with their body changes. So I don't think that we could just say, okay, let's get rid of social media and it will all go away. It definitely won't. Kids are being fed this in the public education system that our tax dollars are paying for. Children are being fed this in doctors' offices. You know, when they go for a regular checkup and the doctor says, do you want your mother in the room? Because it's optional. You're 15 now in the state of Wisconsin and they are not allowed if you don't want them there. So I think it's very orchestrated as a society for whatever reason I believe it's financial gains for the medical industry. It is generally where I think the medical field is coming from. And I'm not exactly sure why the government is doing it, potentially to turn us into a communist society. And the best way to do that is to break apart the nuclear family and make children dependent on the public education, on the government to go to for a safe, comfortable place.
Anybody else?
Well, I say I was on the social media, the whole COVID thing, when I was identifying as trans. And I would say my situation is unique because I didn't get a lot of extra forces like peers, and I didn't feel that school was pushing me. I would say I was mostly influenced by social media because I got the idea from social media. People on social media were saying that it was right for them, it must be right for everybody. There was signs that you're trans videos, and it's just like, you're insecure, like, big whoop, I'm 12, of course I'm insecure, that doesn't mean I'm a dude. So I definitely would say social media has a big part in it. And I think since it's taken over social media and so many people are identifying from social media, it seeped its way to the school system and the medical system because people are demanding they be affirmed, and these teachers and doctors are scared that if they don't affirm these kids, it's going to be their fault. They're going to make them to the trans suicide statistic. So I do think it's mostly social media and it's seeping into our public programs.
Anybody else?
Well, similar to Autumn, there's a lot of obsession with social media, especially since there was no supervision. Honestly, watching YouTube videos for hours, like Autumn was saying, where 12 signs you're trans. And it'll be like, oh my God, 10 of them I have, so I must be trans. And then the influencers really glamorize this idea that you could become this perfect version of yourself, your authentic self, by chopping off your body parts. Like, who wouldn't want that when you're so dissociated and you're feeling like you're ugly and worthless, and someone online saying, oh my God, I'm living the best life because I did this not to my body. You should try it too, because you have all these signs that you are just like me. So the internet preys on kids, people like me, people like Laura, people like Autumn, people like Ari. And I think we were like the first guinea pigs to really understand and experience the internet. And we're the ones experiencing the ramifications and the consequences that the social media and the internet has. And it's sad, but we had to go through that to see the darkness of what the internet and the social media could provide, so that we can create better structures for kids that are going through it now. And so, yes, it's a social contagion. It's spreading like wildfire. It has been through COVID, because a lot of kids were doing nothing but going on TikTok and seeing similar videos that I was seeing. But it was more stimulating because you can just, our society nowadays only has like a 5-second attention span, kind of like a goldfish that only gets captivated by quick videos. If they don't like it, swipe up and then they'll see a new one. And it's this constant feeding of their belief system that, yeah, there is something wrong with me, but I'm still gonna be loved because I'm part of this community. So, I mean, I don't think our brains are able to handle all the stimulation that comes from staring at a screen for hours at a time. And so it's kind of like cult-like behavior where in cults, they sort of put people through like intense destimulation or overstimulation so that they can mind control. That's sort of the same thing with social media. Kids at night just go on their phones scrolling and being connected with people online that are sharing these similar echo chamber beliefs in which they're being indoctrinated and trained into believing that there is something wrong with themselves and they're born in the wrong body.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna ask a follow-up then question too. Can you talk just a little bit about when you decided to detransition, how the community, treated you? Because I think everyone needs to really kind of hear that point of view.
When I detransitioned, that was my senior year of college. I'm kind of grateful I didn't have any friends in the physical world. But after posting a video about detransition, I think the hate that I received was more online. A lot of people didn't like what I had to say, but also people loved what I had to say. And they were in support